Good afternoon, everyone. Now, you've heard all the scientific data, you've heard the facts, you've heard the statistics. I'm going to talk from my heart. You're going to hear a story to go with the data. I have my Nell here. Where I live at Sunnyside, which is 134 kilometres southwest of Longreach. It is in the V of the Thompson River and the Vergemont Creek, where I grew up. When I was born, my father was managing Pandy Station out of Birdsville, and I spent most of my formative years, my primary school years in Maree, went to boarding school from there, so I'd have to say I was a Maree person. If anyone comes from down that area, they know how important the Cooper is to the whole economy, to the way of life, etc. I do not get any personal gain from the Cooper or the Thompson flooding at all. Our property is in the V, but we have got no flood out country. In a huge flood, it might flood into a back paddock, but we don't have any personal gain. I want to share with you some of my earliest memories of the Cooper, and it was called the Cooper, where I come from. Sounds like an Alan Jackson song there. The Cooper was folklore in our home because in 1949, long before I was born, I might add, my father swam 600 bullocks across the flooded Cooper on the Birdsville track. And they were C.C. Morton bullocks from Birdsville, and they were going to the railhead at Maree. No one had done that for 30 years. There is a can at the spot where he actually swam the bullocks out, and it did make the Advertiser in Adelaide, and my maternal grandmother said, at least you could have had a shave. That was folklore in our home, but in the 1960s when the Cooper was coming down, Mrs. Cruz, my mother and Jeffrey, one of the Cruz boys, and myself went in this little old white Zephyr up to the Cooper to meet Tom Cruise. And there's only one Tom Cruise in my life, and that's Tom Cruise the mailman. And Tom was coming down and he was going to meet us. I don't know why he's meeting us in the Cooper, but he was. Tom was always late, and we camped in the Cooper waiting for him. And as kids, we thought we were going to be washed away by a wall of water, which never happened, and Tom never arrived, which is par for the course for him. I did go back when the Cooper did actually cross the road and go across on the punt. And I can still remember that as a child going across there. I went back with Tom and Mrs. Cruz. It was a great experience. In the 1970s, when the Cooper came down again, I went across on the punt again. People made the trip from Maree. It was like de rigueur to go up to the Cooper to go across on the punt, to go fishing, camping, whatever. It was a huge event in the lifestyle of that area. Great excitement. It was almost palpable. Also in that same, after it flooded in 1970, I can remember going out to Lake Eyre and going on a speedboat on Lake Eyre, and I was always blown away by the fact that there are actual waves on the lake, this huge, huge body of water. In 1977, when I first started teaching in Oodnadatta, the road and the railway line had to be diverted because the lake still had water in it, and you could see the pinkness of it because it was drying back, and had this very pink hue. 1983 saw us move. Am I going too fast? Saw us move to Queensland, and we're going to see the Thompson from a different angle. We crossed the Thompson in December 1983, about 11 o'clock at night, and it was in flood. And we crossed at Bogiwong, and it has little sides on the bridge like this, and it was trickling over. It was a bit fearful, but I thought, wow, this is the place to be, and the water was going across the causeways. It was great. And that river has a real impact on our lives, because Lad Milson, who lived at Bogiwong for many years, used to always say, there'll be a run in the river before Christmas. And if there wasn't, look out. And it was going to be a dry year. If it floods, we have to go around a different way. It is really part of our lives. We have a gully on our place called Pie Melon Gully. And in 1990, when it rained and rained, my kids used to say, the water in Pie Melon Gully runs into Broadwater, which runs in to the Thompson River, which then joins with the Barcoo to make the Cooper, which then runs into Lake Eyre. Back to where I come from. Just this, just to think that that water travelled all the way. Most probably not the same amount of water, but they thought it did. When I was teaching in Stonehenge in 2000, there was a really major flood, and I had the opportunity to view it from the eastern side. And every morning when I'd go to school, I'd look out the window and I'd see the water had come up more and more. I didn't get home for 9 weeks that year, and all at the bottom of this hill that goes out of Stonehenge, that's the road to home, and the water was right up to the bottom of that hill. And again, there were waves, this huge amount of water. It was quite amazing. Are we right there, Bruce?
Yeah, certainly.
Okay. After our youngest son went to boarding school and the 3 others were working, I thought I'd better get more involved in our region and our industry, and I put my name down for the Coopers Creek Catchment Committee to become a member, which I duly did, and by some simple twist of fate I became the chair of that committee, which then put me on the board of Desert Channels Queensland. And it was through my experience going through the Cooper Creek Water Resource Plan and talking to people like Tom Carruthers that I realised that with irrigation, there are not a lot of checks and balances on it. You can have a licence for X amount of water, but who's going to check it that you're using only that amount of water? And if you do go over your allocation, the fine at the time was so pathetic. It's no incentive not to do it. And the other defining moment for me when I was on that committee was that I attended the Australian Floodplain Association conference in Windora. And there are a series of people there talking about their experience with irrigation and when the river's been tampered with, etc. There were people from the Guida River, I have to say that's my maiden name, the Macquarie Marshes, the Coorong, and they weren't bleeding hearts and saying, oh, this is terrible, but just showing what it was like to what it had become because of irrigation. And there's talk now of small-scale irrigation, and people are saying there may be new technologies and we can do things differently. But the key is water, and that the new technologies are not going to make more water. It's still the same amount of water. It is with fear and trepidation that I put this next slide up, but I'm going to do it. Everyone has talked about the elephant in the room. I couldn't believe it today, and riding elephants, but I had that slide first. Mining does have a place. It has a place in our economy, and we need it. And they have a right to mine, the mining companies. However, they do not have a right to destroy the landscape. So I'm not going to go on about mining, but it really is something we have to be very aware of and the impacts of it. We hear words like ephemeral, I heard a new one today, intermittent, fragile, the last free-flowing river system in the world, pristine. They're great words, but it means more than that to us, to the people who live and work here. It's our way of life. And having this river system in good condition is hugely important. I feel as though I can talk about this because my husband worked on Durham Downs for 5 years. He then was head stockman and manager on the western side of the lake and saw the South Australian rivers that run into it. I've got 3 sons that have either worked on the Cooper or on the Diamantina system. And so I've got that connection there, and I feel as though I can talk about it, and it really concerns me that it could be tampered with, water could be taken from it. We and I also have well, I don't like calling her my stepdaughter, but she is. She lives at Malurina, which is where Lake Eyre is, and just their passion for their country and what it means to them to have a flood every now and again, and the boom in tourism, etc. We need a whole of basin approach to look after and protect this oh so valuable resource. Am I early?